morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
All right. Well, so some of you texted back and said that you are on the live feed, and that's nice to hear. And today, just like last week, we talked about things relative to our situation from the Bible. So I did some research on the virus, and God pointed me to some passages in the Bible. We live in a time where people aren't quite sure what to think about God in this time. Questions arise. The sermon today is to point out that God was way ahead of the curve, pardon the pun, when He gave a prescription, basically, for His people to be protected 4,000 years ago. Long before medical experts had any knowledge of what a virus was, or what an infection was, or how they mutated, or where they came from. God gave a prescription for His people how to deal with something like this when it came along. And it's interesting that today we're using the very same method today that 3,000 years ago God gave to Moses to give to the Hebrews. And so today we're going to look at one particular illness and how God explained to His people how to deal with it. Now, back in that day, the doctors would have been the priests, would have been those who worked in the temple. They were given the instructions on how to help the people through a scenario like this, where an infection or a disease arose from the people around them, or from just simply their disobedience to their own laws, which God had given to them to protect them. So when people seem to think that God is causing something to happen because people were disobedient, that's not the case. It is the case in some occasions, but not in a situation like this. What God has given to His people is the preventative measures. If they obey those preventative measures, they will not get into this scenario. And so today, I'd like you to turn to Leviticus. Turn to Leviticus chapter 13, and what we're going to study is a few chapters. We're going to look at a few chapters, and it's the law concerning leprosy. Now, leprosy isn't a virus. It's an infection, the opposite of a virus. Anyway, it's not a virus, it's an infection, but it can still spread. It spreads differently, but it can still spread to another person. Now, real quick, I want to talk about the particulars of this, the coronavirus, and explain a couple things about this coronavirus, where it came from. According to the experts that I looked up, this coronavirus does come from a bat, initially, and it has a certain, this virus has some resistance to things that our body would normally have to fight off a virus. But typically, our body fights off a virus in a number of ways, but one of the ways it kills a virus when it gets into us is through heat. You see, our body gets a fever, and that fever is designed to kill the virus, because a virus typically cannot withstand the fever or the raised temperature. And so your body raises its temperature and creates a fever, and that fever slows and literally kills the virus eventually, along with some other things happening in the body. So this one's a bit different because this one has a resistance to heat, has a resistance to a fever. Why? Well, apparently because the bat, which picked this up from something else, by the way, because the bat flies so hard and so rapidly, its body raises its temperature every time a bat goes out to feed in long distances. And the temperature spikes in a bat. Their body temperature goes up from normal. And then on the way back to their cave or to wherever they sleep, their body temperature raises up again on the way back. Now this has allowed the virus to build a defensive or a resistance to heat. And so our fevers don't necessarily kill it as fast as the typical virus. And that's why it's very deadly. Now, doctors have said, we're not quite sure which is worse, the fever, which often kills people, or the virus if they try to bring the temperature down. Now, you have heard already, maybe you've heard, that Motrin is not particularly advised for this virus. That to take Motrin, which is to bring down your fever, is not the best solution. And this has been out there a bit. Now, there's no studies on it, so they haven't given us any scientific proof, but there tends to be some anecdotal evidence that when people take anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen or Motrin, it tends to prolong the sickness. Well, that would explain why. Because it's built up a resistance to heat, and when you cool your body down, you're not allowing your body to do whatever it can with your fever to try and kill the virus. Okay. Now, I'm going to show you, I'm going to go through a couple things about a disease in the Bible that's very, very focused on. It's called leprosy. When we look at leprosy today, we understand that leprosy is nowhere near as contagious as the Bible when it gives all these safeguards against leprosy that we're going to read. We would think, today we realize leprosy is very hard to catch. It's not easy to catch. You have to practically live with a person, its secretions and fluids, to catch a leprosy. It's very difficult to catch. You literally have to live with people. There's actually no known cure actually for leprosy, although there is treatment for leprosy, as far as I can find on the web. So what I'd like to do is we're gonna talk about through this passage how God gave the Hebrews 3,000 years ago the protective measures for leprosy. But I contend that God gave these measures, and that knowing that the people of the Hebrews, the Hebrew people, would apply these same tactics to any spreading disease, not just leprosy. He gave it with in the context of leprosy, because leprosy was an obvious thing. You could see it. You could see how participating in these actions would heal it. But I guarantee you that the Hebrews would apply these preventative measures of spread, social distancing, cleansing, washing, sunlight. These very same things were for leprosy. I'll guarantee you that people of the Jewish nation way back 3,000 years ago were applying it to any contagion that came into their camp. And that's why I believe God gave this to them. They wouldn't have known about viruses. They wouldn't have known about anything else, but they knew about leprosy. And this is the context God was able to give. Sometimes that God doesn't. He gives you a context. He gives you a context for something, but that thing is for many things. For instance, God gave the people, and we're not going to go over, we don't have time to go over it today, but God gave the Jewish people the kosher diet. And what is the kosher diet? Well, we know many of the things. Number one, you don't eat shellfish. Shellfish is a crustacean animal like lobster and crab, and they eat all of the garbage off the bottom. They eat dead things. And shellfish can be poisonous. At certain times of the year, they can be poisonous and kill you. Well, God also gave, and this is the most important one, He gave parameters for livestock. Now, meat is a big part of the diet. Not everybody today eats meat, but back then everybody ate meat. And here's the parameters that God gave to the Jewish nation, or the Hebrew nation, which it would have been called back then. The Hebrew nation, 3,000 years ago, when Moses came off the mountain, and he gave them this list of things. He said of your cattle or of your livestock that you can eat, there are two qualifications. It must be a split-foot mammal. Split-foot, a cow is a split-foot animal. A pig is a split-foot animal. Split meaning two toes, basically. But there was another qualification, is it must chew its cud. So those two qualifications were mandatory for the Hebrew nation, now the Jewish nation. They could only eat meat from animals that were both split-foot and chewed their own cud. Why? The key common denominator here is that those two characteristics in any animal, cows, sheep, goats, you name it, the one characteristic that fits them all, that doesn't fit necessarily a split-foot animal like a pig that doesn't chew its cud, is that those animals never eat another animal. They never eat meat. Cows never eat meat. They don't go up and eat a dead animal on the side of the road. A cow will never eat meat. Goats and sheep do not eat meat. And for that reason, they are never going to pick up a disease from a dead animal and then spread it to those who eat it. This is a kosher diet given by God to the Jews. We believe, or we're being told, that the eating of bats, live bats, has contributed or was the reason for the spread of the coronavirus. It's not the bat's fault that it flies all over the place and eats just about anything and picks up these viruses from all over. That's how animals pick up viruses. They pick them up from different animals and so forth and so on. And they build up immunities to these things so that they don't die. And typically, animals and humans, like bats, we're never meant to be them. We're never meant to eat bats, especially without cooking them, like some of the Chinese do, and other nations, by the way. Some of the things that other people eat are absolutely crazy. Eating a live bat will transfer, if they have this virus, to a person. Today, one of the things that causes the virus, apparently, because a bat typically couldn't even actually transfer from bat to human.